Of course.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball. A few days ago, I posted something up on lockedonfantasybasketball.com regarding upcoming Red Rock Dynasty Leagues and Listener Leagues. All that information will be finalized in the coming months. There's nothing that's 100% imminent with that as well. But if you do want to get priority access to those leagues, you need to become a Patreon subscriber at patreon.com/redrock_bball, much like my Twitter handle, which is at redrock_bball. Not sure if I already mentioned that, but I'm sure you know it by now. Today's show, we're going to be looking at the Dallas Mavericks, recapping their 2017-18 NBA season. Michael Bolton.
Let's get to it.
All right, let's do that indeed. The NBA draft, I wouldn't say it worked out perfectly for Dallas as they ended up with the 5th pick in the draft, but that's still a pretty good pick, and they're going to have a reasonable selection of players. My initial assumption is that we're going to have Doncic and Ayton go in the top 2, and then we're going to have some selection of Jaren Jackson Jr., Mo Bamba, and Marvin Bagley go in the next 3 picks. So Dallas is in position to grab a fairly significant player. We saw Bamba at the NBA Combine weigh in with a record wingspan of 7'10". That would be excellent for them to get. Obviously, a guy that played in Texas as well. Bagley is a scoring 4. Jaren Jackson, who's a guy I really like, another option for them there. So they are going to have, it ends up being really good to get that 5th pick, in my opinion. Really strong section. Then you got maybe Michael Porter jumps into that, depending on how all his tests go and what they think with his medical and all that sort of stuff. Wendell Carter's another option. There's plenty of options here for Dallas at this spot. So while they did fall in the lottery, it's far from the end of the world. They are still going to get, in my opinion, a fairly quality player. They also have pick 35 in the draft and pick 54 in June when the draft rolls around. But let's roll ahead and have a look at how their free agency situation looks for the 2018 off season. In terms of restricted free agents, there's a few of them, and a few that I think are relatively important. You've got Yogi Ferrell, you've got Dougie Mcgirt, you've got Salah Mejri, and Asa Harrison, who are all restricted free agents. Now, I wouldn't necessarily put Harrison in the same class as those guys, although he played some roles down the end, didn't do them all that well. The important ones here are Mcdermott, Yogi Ferrell, and to a lesser degree Salah Mejri. In terms of those restricted guys, I can see Mcdermott, they would like to bring him back. I can see them doing the same with Ferrell. Mejri, I think they would like to do that. They like what he brings as a backup center. So I could see all 3 of those guys potentially returning for this Mavericks team. In terms of unrestricted free agents, a couple of key ones here as well. Nerlens Noel, almost zero chance that he is back in Dallas, in my opinion, so I don't think we need to worry too much about that. And the other one is Seth Curry, who didn't play at all in the 17-18 season with those leg fractures. So him returning gives them an extra scoring punch, an additional ball handler, an excellent 3-point shooter, someone who is going to be a part of their rotation. And depending on what happens with him, whether he does come back or not, is really going to impact what happens with Yogi Ferrell also. So that's a really key piece that could be brought back and could bring this Mavericks team up and give them a couple of extra wins next season just from his presence alone, not even factoring in the growth of Dennis Smith and the number 5 draft pick for this season. The other decision they have to make, which is a fairly simple one, is they have a team option on Dirk Nowitzki for $5 million. They could very well decline it and sign him to another 2-year deal with team options involved, depending on cap situations. We know Dirk's amenable to all those sort of things, so there's no doubt that Dirk, even after having ankle surgery this offseason, is going to be back and he is going to be a member of the Dallas Mavericks. There's 3 guys with non-guarantees on their deals. Dorian Finney-Smith and Maxie Kleber are 2 guys who I think that they will guarantee and they'll keep around, especially Finney-Smith, who missed large chunks of this season, but he was able to come back fairly strongly. Kleber definitely exceeded all expectations, and the other one is Kyle Collinsworth, who did okay, but I think with the return of, say, Seth Curry, his role on the team is looking not anywhere near as rosy as what it may have looked in this 16-17 season. Not that it was all that rosy. in that time frame anyway. But he's a guy that, if they are looking for flexibility, he's a pretty easy guy to cut. In terms of their record, they finished 2017-18 with a 24-58 record, which was a staggering 9 games under their expected win-loss. That is a huge, huge difference, meaning that there was a lot of close games that they lost, and Mavericks fans would be able to attest to that, and maybe to the fact that the team was actually probably a little bit better than where they ended up, meaning I could see this team push from being a team with the 4th worst record, which is what they were this season, being that team that can push up to maybe the 10th worst record, maybe a 33, 34, 35 win team. Again, depending on what happens in free agency, they could be a player for a guy like DeMarcus Cousins. We've heard that bandied about quite a bit. DeAndre Jordan, does he come back to Dallas? Dennis Smith takes a step forward. Pick 5 comes in. We have Doug Mcdermott maybe jumping forward. Probably unlikely, but there are opportunities here. Seth Curry returning. There are opportunities here for this team to push into a low to mid-30s team in terms of win-loss. For last season, they ran a very slow pace, 26th in pace. They were 24th in offensive rating and 17th in defensive rating, which, given their personnel, I think 17th in defensive rating is a really strong finish. Again, we're not talking about a team that's blessed with excellent defenders. Wes Matthews does his thing, but Dennis Smith was atrocious defensively. Dirk is as slow as it comes. Defensively, we had other struggles in the front court and right across the roster. Harrison Barnes, the pencil, he's not a super strong defender either. In terms of other things, they were 4th in the NBA in three-point attempts. So given that they play at such a slow pace, they were really, really focused on taking those threes. They get to the line barely never, under 19 attempts per game, which was 29th in the league. The worst offensive rebounding team in the NBA, the second worst at generating blocks, 25th at generating steals. Like very, very little stuff that defensively there, but still they were able to restrict opposition teams from scoring, as I mentioned, by their 17th ranked defensive rating. They rebounded fairly strongly on the defensive glass. 7th highest in defensive rebound percentage, but overall that's not a huge amount of rebounds because of the slower pace that they did play at. But some okay things and some things to build on, and I don't think it's a complete write-off. They also were the lowest team in the NBA in terms of turnovers given away, so they took care of the ball. Again, impressive when you're dealing with a rookie point guard too, so it's things that you can associate with a Rick Carlisle coach team. Some discipline, taking the right shots, just not having the talent there, and again, some late game malfunctions that did cause them to finish, and probably in their best interest, finish well lower than what they possibly should have. And we'll see how that can change as we move forward. In terms of some individual numbers for the year, the highest offensive rating on this team was Dwight Powell, who is one of these guys that Advanced Stats really, really likes, and we'll talk about him a little bit more later. The best defensive rating on the team, Nerlens Noel. Nobody should be surprised about that. Noel can be a very, very good defender. There was obviously a myriad of issues here in Dallas, the thumb injury, the lack of trying, the clashing with the front office, but he played okay in stretches, and he is going to be a very interesting player for this offseason and next fantasy season because we know that he still has that potential. The worst defensive rating was Doug Mcgirt. Nobody is shocked. The worst offensive rating, Azza Harrison. Again, no reason to be shocked with that at all. And in terms of other advanced stats, Dwight Powell led the team in bunches of them. PER, true shooting, win shares per 48, and VORP. Dwight Powell was the best player in this team according to all of those numbers. Dennis Smith had the highest usage, while JJ Barea was the best offensive player by offensive box score plus minus, and Salah Mejri was the leader in defensive box score plus minus with a mammoth 5.3, and overall box score plus minus with 3.1, mainly because of how impactful he was defensively. Really, really good in that area quite clearly. But he's not a guy that you can really project out to becoming some excellent full-time starting center or anything along those lines. So if they drafted a guy like Bumba or Jackson, you could see those guys into that starting lineup immediately, or even Bagley playing alongside Dirk, although the defensive ineptitude of that front court would be interesting, and also depends on where they play the pencil Harrison Barnes, especially if Seth Curry does return, pushing Wes to the 3 and Harrison up to the 4. So they've got some options here in Dallas, but let's start with Harrison Barnes. He was a guy that I was down on heading into the season. I thought he was a big bust candidate. He was getting drafted at pick 63 on Yahoo, and that was extraordinarily high in my opinion. He finished the year 94th, so it wasn't like he was horrible, but he definitely didn't live up to that draft position. That was, that sort of ADP was expecting him to take big steps forward from what he did last year, and I didn't think that was possible, and it turns out it wasn't. He just wasn't able to get to that level. He scored 19 points a game, 6 rebounds, but he's just so piss poor in other areas. 2 assists, 0.6 steals, 0.2 blocks, 45 from the field is subpar, 83 from the line. That's pretty good. He offers some positivity there. Only 1.5 triples per game. Like nothing that's overly spectacular here from Barnesy. In comparison to last season, pretty similar. He rebounded the ball a little bit better. That's great. He hit an extra half a 3 per game. That's great. But his efficiency dropped. He went from his true shooting was the same. He went from a field goal percentage of 47 to 44, and his free throws went from 86 to 83, but he was able to marginally increase his 3-point percentage, but still just doesn't do anything defensively. 0.6 and point steals and 0.2 blocks are poor numbers for a fantasy option, and that's why he's not able to really ever crack that top 50, and he actually went backwards in his ranking this year from 81 down to 94. And defensively, he struggles. Offensively, he's a high usage player, which is what this team needs. But in general, you want him to be the third banana, I think, at best. And they would hope that they can get Dennis Smith to grow into that role and then look for someone else to complement someone so that Barnes can play that role and focus a little bit more defensively. But he needs to be able to do more defensively. He needs to be able to shoot the ball a little bit better as well, to move the ball around. And he just isn't that guy just at this point. He finds it hard to create his own shot as well, gets assisted on a lot of his possessions. Not a great one-on-one guy. Again, not a good shooter. One of definitely in the lower quadrant of players, 32nd percentile for effective field goal percentage for his position. And as I said, the defensive stuff is pretty poor from Harrison Barnes, and that does limit his overall upside. He is 26 years of age, so we're heading into prime years of the pencil, but what more does he do better? What can he do better from here? Can he become more efficient? Sure, he can go to 46% from the field. Steals, the blocks, the assists, they're just never going to come. But if he had a 20.2 3-point a year on 46% shooting, I wouldn't be stunned, but it's still, he's not going to be able to push into becoming an excellent fantasy player. Wes Matthews, 63 games this season, had to have surgery on a stress fracture in his leg. 34 minutes per game, 12.7 points, 2.4 triples, 3 rebounds, 2.7 assists, 1.2 steals, and the efficiency's been really lacking from Wesy. 41% from the field, 82 from the line, and 38 from 3 for a true shooting of 54%. One of the things that was impressive with him in his time in Portland was he was able to shoot the ball better than this. He had 45 and 44% from the field his last 2 seasons, whereas the 3 years in Dallas, 39, 39, and 40.6. And that Achilles injury, while he recovered remarkably quickly, he hasn't been able to get his accuracy on his shooting back at all. What he has done the last 2 years is improved his passing, 2.7 assists this year, 2.9 last season. Still hitting 2.5 threes per game, but realistically, because of that drop in efficiency numbers, it takes him from being a top 60, top 70 guy to being a player who's outside the top 100, which is what he was the last 3 years. And his numbers, they're not that different from Portland to Dallas, right? So he averaged 16 points per game in Portland, and he's about 13 in Dallas. So that's 3 points per game. But you can assign that difference to the fact that he's shooting 5-6% worse from the field. He's hitting the same amount of threes, similar rebounds, same assists, same steals, same blocks, getting to the line at a similar amount, maybe a little bit less. But basically, it's taking him from being the 49th ranked player in his last season in Portland to 105th this year, because that efficiency has dropped that much, and then that also affects his points. And at the stage where he is in his career, 31 years of age, coming off another leg injury, I wouldn't be stunned if Wes doesn't play the 34 minutes per game that he's played basically every year for the last 5 seasons, or if he moves into some sort of a smaller bench role, depending on what happens with their front court, with Curry, with all these other guys there. But he is clearly on the downside of his career. I wouldn't be expecting efficiencies to bounce back for Wes Matthews. Defensively, he is still really good. We have to give him that. Like he's really strong with defensive stuff. Probably their best perimeter defender, but still had a horrendous on-off of negative 10.2, which is just, the only two players on the team worse were Aaron Harrison, who played 230 minutes, and Scott Hobson, who is a real person, who played 8 minutes for the Mavericks this season. No one else was worse in on-off metrics, which is not the be-all and end-all of defensive production, but it's clearly not a great sign that that's the case. Solid defensive box score plus minus, but overall just not a real impactful player. I didn't think overall, and I think his time as being a standard league fantasy guy is probably done, especially considering the only category you're really getting positive value in is threes with a tiny bit of steals, and you can find those threes in lots of different places. Meaning, again, I don't think that he is a guy that is a necessity to be viewed that way. Dirk Nowitzki was solid. He's going to be 40 by the time next season kicks off. He played 25 minutes per game and played 77 games. Now, a lot of the thought on Dirk heading into the season is, they're going to really limit his minutes. They're not going to play him in all these games. Well, he barely missed, really. He missed the last 4 games of the season, and before that, 1 other game. And those last 4 games of the season was an ankle injury. He had surgery on that, but basically he played in every game this season. Last year, he played just 54 games and 26 minutes a game, so they did reduce his playing time. His overall impact is not where it was, but he wasn't far off the year before and still able to play those games. I would expect another minute or two to dip with Dirk next season. He averaged 12 and 6 this season, 2 triples, 1.6 assists, and he's never going to be a steals and blocks contributor, but he kept them what he always does: 0.6 steals, 0.6 blocks, 46, 90, and 41% for a true shooting of 58. That is fantastic. The one thing that did happen with Dirk this season is his usage dropped. He'd been at 25 or over for each of the past 4 seasons, and he went down to 21% this year, with the offense turning over more to Dennis Smith and Harrison Barnes, and I think we're going to see more of that continue for Dirk, who just becomes more of a knockdown shooter guy who probably plays fewer minutes as we move forward, and I don't think that Dirk is going to be a standard league guy for next season. And of course, if we're looking at dynasty value for Dirk, it's very limited because we know that he is a million years old. Defensive stats for Dirk, pretty positive. He was still able to contribute to this team quite a bit. Strong win shares per 48 numbers, an above average PER, above average true shooting, positive offensive and defensive box score plus minus. One of the higher VORPs on the team, just second behind Dwight Powell, actually equal with Wes Matthews in that metric. So he was able to do some impactful things, and he is still clearly a legend of the game and a useful and impactful player across the NBA landscape. Talk a little bit about Dennis Smith Jr. here. I spoke about him at length in part 3 of the 2017 NBA draft recap, but we'll just go over what he did this year. He played 69 games.
Giggity!
Under 30 minutes per game, 15, 4, and 5, a steal, 1.5 threes, and of course the efficiency is what killed him. 31 from 3, 40% from the field, and 69% from the line.
Giggity!
There is massive room for improvement here with Smith, clearly. He should be looking at 32 to 33 minutes per game next season, which could or should push him to 18 or 19 points. The idea is that maybe he gets to 2 threes per game, 4 to 4.5 rebounds, and 7 to 7.5 assists. I think maybe that's upper level. Over his last 8 games, he averaged 7.5 assists. I think he can do that. He had a steal per game this year. That can go to 1.2. And if he just gets that field goal percentage up to 42 or 43, then we're really starting to cook. Now, he is part of the reason why he was the 140th ranked player this year is because he was such a significant negative in field goal percentage and free throw percentage, a -2 in field goal percentage, Z score, and -0.8 for free throw percentage. Now, the free throws at 69%, that's not far off what he was doing in college. Maybe we can look at another 2 to 3% rise, and I think we can get a similar thing from field goal percentage. And that in itself is going to add an extra 2 to 3 points onto his game. Plus, it's going to add increases in both those categories, which could very easily push him just 50, 40 spots higher in rankings. And that's not even including an increase in playing time of 3 to 4 minutes. So I think that he is a real chance, and you won't need to draft him here, I'm fairly certain. He's a real chance to be a top 60, top 50 guy next season, and will almost definitely be that in the next 3 years' time. So, don't need to talk too much about Smitty. I talked about him quite a bit on that 2017 draft recap show. Let's talk about another older player on this team, Jose Juan Barea. He is turning 34. He played 69 games, as a few people on his team did. 23 minutes a game, 11.6 points, 1.7 threes, 3 rebounds, 6 assists, half a steal, 44, 78, and 37 for some fairly nice efficiency numbers. And he was the 133rd ranked player this season. He was an absolutely sensational guy to own just to get those assists. 6 assists per game, over 6 assists per game is fantastic. Doing it at okay efficiency, not fantastic, but 44 from the field, it is pretty good. Plus, he was hitting you threes, almost 2 per game, getting you 3 rebounds. That's enough for him to have been a standard league guy that should have been owned pretty much all of the season. Multiple double-digit assist games for Barea. He had to deal with a few injuries here and there throughout the season and ended up with an oblique strain that kept him out of the end of the year. But I think that's could have been a bit of tanking action there. Now, Barea, at the age of almost 34, going to be 34 next season, does he take a step back? I think with Steph... wish it was Steph. With Seth Curry potentially returning, not guaranteed, potentially returning, depends what happens with Yogi Ferrell. I could see a couple of minutes off here for Barea with Dennis Smith pushing up a couple of extra as well. But he's going to be someone to watch, because if he finds himself in a 24-minute role again, those assists are valuable and they're going to be useful, and they're going to be something that you can use from a fantasy point of view. Obviously, his upside is really limited because of his age and where he plays, and he's never going to be getting massive roles moving forward from this. But this is a perfect team for him. He shot the ball fantastically, assisted well, set things up, played strong defense. Really they couldn't have asked for much more from Barea this season than what they got. A PR of 18 is obviously really good. Sensational with the offensive box score, plus minus stuff. Really, 45% assist rate is a huge number, and he was super valuable in that metric when we're looking at it from a fantasy point of view. Let's talk about the guy who is the advanced metrics darling on this team, and that is Dwight Powell. He's older than you expect. He'll be 27 by the time next season kicks off. He had his best season of his career, 79 games, just 21 minutes. And you look at his numbers and you go, well, what's so good about them? 8.5 points, 5.6 rebounds, half a three, 0.8 steals, 0.4 blocks. But it's the efficiency which he does it at. A true shooting of 66%, 59 from the field, 72 from the line, 33% from three for 0.4 threes per game. Does it on low usage. I thought he was impressive, and he had real strong stretches where he was a standard league guy. We had him at a 21-8 game in March, a string of games in February, 18-6, 19-7, 18-12, 18-6 5, multiple double-digit scoring games on high efficiency, grabs rebounds well, and provides solid contributions in steals and blocks. His block rate went down this year. Last year, he was at 1.1 per 36. This year, down to 0.7. So that's a pretty significant drop. Steal rate also dropped for him, but still a strong rebounder, good scorer. Really efficient finishing. 59% when he was at 52 last year is a significant jump for Dwight Powell. Massive true shooting, massive PER. Strong defensive stuff from him. He does have to be able to take the three at a little bit of a better rate. He only attempted 19% of his shots from three, and didn't hit them at a sensational rate. But he was still, pretty impressive, and he is quite good for a big man, especially in terms of getting steals and being able to hit some of those shots that he did. Strong, really great finishes, 75% dunks, alley-oops, worked well with Dennis Smith in that time as well, but does need to improve some of that three-point shooting. But he's one of these players, and I say this all the time, is that he does what he does well. He doesn't try to overextend himself, and that's a key thing in the NBA, I think, is having a player who knows what they can do, knows what they can't do, and does what they can do well. And that's exactly what Dwight Powell is. Does what he gets told to, can stretch out and take the three, doesn't necessarily hit it, but can do it, plays defense, plays in the right position, doesn't try to overextend himself, and he's solid. Now, will he ever become a 12-team league guy? I think that the Mavericks would like to push him into a larger role at some point, but with Dirk still there for next season, likely a big man coming in, I think if he is going to get a bigger role, we're maybe one more year away from that. I think if Dirk was retiring, then you could see him starting in that front court, either alongside Barnes or Barnes at the 3 next to a guy like Bumble or Bagley, whatever they're going to do there. But Powell is going to get 20-plus minutes next season. I feel fairly confident. He is going to be a solid enough rebounder and defensive stats guy with high field goal percentage that you can use him in stretches. And when the minutes push up to 27, 28, which it did at times, and he was starting plenty of games, he was obviously really useful in that stretch. So he can be someone that you look to in that sort of an area. The next guy was a real disappointing season from Nerlens Noel. He was getting drafted at pick 74, and I thought if you were drafting early, picking him at that spot probably was all right. He had top 40 upside. We assumed at that point that he would be starting for this team alongside Dirk, but that wasn't the case. They brought him off the bench with Dirk starting at center. And it was just a lost season. 29 games, 16 minutes, 4.5 points, 5.8 rebounds, 1.1 steals, and 0.8 blocks. But 52 from the field is efficient. 75 from the line is efficient. True shooting of 56, it's efficient. And pretty much all the hallmarks of Nerlens Noel's game were there. If you go back to his time from the last few seasons, he averaged more rebounds per 36 than he has at any point in his career. 13 rebounds. The scoring did go down for him as he wasn't used as much. His usage has gone from 18% down to 14%, so his scoring dipped. But over his last 3 seasons prior to this one, his steals per 36 were 2.2, 2.1, 2.2, and this year he had 2.4. His blocks were 2.2, 1.8, 1.8, and he was at 1.7. So he was just doing everything that he has always done. He just couldn't get enough minutes. Now, he's a guy that needs 23 minutes, and he is a top 100 fantasy player. He was 186th in 16 minutes, but if you extrapolate everyone out to per 36 numbers for the year, he was the 26th best player, averaging 10 and 13 with 2.5 steals and 1.7 blocks and good efficiency. And it was clearly his best free throw percentage season. I'm under no illusion that he's coming back to Dallas, but he should be able to find himself on another team. Now, the thing is does he find himself as the third center? Or does he find himself as the second center? And I don't really think he's going to be finding himself as a starting center anywhere, but he could. And if he does, then he is a comfortable top 100 guy with top 30 upside. If he was getting 28 a night, he is a top 30 upside guy. I have worries about the shitblokeness of him, the attitude issues, although, to be fair, with all the bullshit going on this season, I thought he handled himself relatively well. There was the pocket hot dog incident with him, the clashes with Carlo, but he came back. He played his role after the thumb injury. He could have pouted and said, well, no, my thumb's screwed, I'm not coming back, but he did. Yeah, I thought he acquitted himself well when he came back and did normal Nerlens Noel things. Again, against the Raptors, 27 minutes, 6.6 rebounds, 5 steals, 3 blocks. Next game, he was a DNP because it was bullshit alternating between him and Mejri. 6 and 6 with 2 steals and 2 blocks. Alternate again. Then the next game, 10 and 12 with 4 steals and a block. Just racking up those defensive numbers like they're nobody's business, which is exactly what he's able to do. And in fact, his first game of the season, we got really excited. He only played 20 minutes, but he had 16 and 11 with a steal and 3 blocks. Went, you know what? Here we go. It's happening. These are the numbers that we can get from Nerlens. So I still hold out hope. Great defensive box score plus minus. Really positive win share stuff. It's a lot of mental issues. It's a lot of fitting in. It's a lot of getting your role right and finding himself on the right team. But I still have a significant level of hope for Nerlens to become an impactful fantasy guy for the next season or two. We'll have to see, of course, how that all pans out depending on what happens in free agency. But he is someone you should be monitoring, and if you can get him for cheap in a dynasty league, do it. Kevin Yogi Ferrell was a guy that had a strong rookie campaign. People were really interested. I heard legitimately people saying Dallas won't take a point guard in the draft because they've got Ferrell, which was absolute nonsense. He is a backup point guard at best, and we saw that this season as he managed 28 minutes per game, played all 82 games, only 10 points, 3 rebounds, 2.5 assists, and 0.8 steals to be the 189th ranked player this season. 43 from the field, 80 from the line, and 37 from 3, mirroring what he did in his 46 games in his first season in the NBA with Dallas. Where does Ferrell go from here? Again, as a restricted free agent, some of it's going to be determined on what happens with Seth Curry. He started 21 games this year with Curry injured, with Barea in and out, with Dorian Finney-Smith limited. And he was okay. I wouldn't say that he was great at any point during the season, but had a monster of an on-off, a plus 8.8, which is obviously a really huge number there for him. And put up some okay numbers at times, but subpar true shooting and PER, real negative defensively. Offensively didn't provide much, negative box score plus minus. I just don't see much with Ferrell being ever a top 100 caliber player, probably not even a top 150 guy. He had the opportunities this year, but definitely did not grasp them. And on a per minute basis, he went significantly backwards from where he was in his rookie season, especially that assist rate, as he was playing a lot more off the ball. And I don't think any team's going to want to make an investment for Yogi Ferrell to become their starting point guard. That would be foolish, I think, in my opinion. Salah Mejri, a guy we talked about earlier, another restricted free agent. He was the 274th ranked player this year. Just 12 minutes per game, 4 boards and 3.6 points with 1 block and 64% from the field. And that's where his value is. It comes from high field goal percentage, and it comes from the ability to block shots. He averaged 3.3 blocks per 36 minutes this season, and if there was an opportunity and he was going to play 20 minutes, you could stream him in and get those blocks and get that high field goal percentage. But I don't know where he goes. He's 32 years of age already. He's not likely to get too much better than this. He can provide good defense, or really, really strong defense, as we saw by his team leading box score plus minus of 5.3. The advanced numbers do really like him. The extreme block percentage, PR of almost 18, great win shares numbers, really strong there, but offensively it's a struggle for Mejri, and I don't ever see him becoming anyone who plays even more than 15 or 16 minutes per game. He is really a limited third string type of a center. Let's go to Dougie Mcgirt, who came across mid-season in that trade from the New York Knicks, that three-way that included Devin Harris and Manny Mudiay. It appears to me as though Mcdermott will remain in Dallas next season. He played 26 games with the Mavs, 23 minutes, shot 48% from the field, 49% from three, which is obviously excellent. 9 points, but in true Mcdermott style, 2.5 rebounds, 1 assist, 0.3 steals, 0.8 blocks. Doesn't turn it over, but does literally nothing apart from hit threes. And in the limited minutes, because of his defensive issues, he's just not going to get those big playing time, which is going to lead to 2.5 threes per game. And then everything else is just so poor. No rebounds, no assists, no steals, no blocks. He just doesn't do anything in those other areas that gives him any sort of fantasy value. He's in the 24th percentile for block rate, the 6th percentile for steal rate, which is obviously horrendous. 14th percentile for offensive rebounding, 33rd percentile for defensive rebound. Just horrendous numbers in all of those non-shooting categories. Clearly, shooting the three was excellent for Doug, but he just does nothing else, and he will never be a good fantasy player. His best fantasy season was the 15-16 year, where he was 272nd and averaged 9.4 points with 1.4 triples. He is a deep league three-point streamer only. We have seen 4 years of Doug Mcdermott in the league. He is 26 years of age, and I do not expect anything to change with him as we move forward. But I do expect that his uniform will remain the same for next year. Maxie Kleber, another 26-year-old, he was a rookie, and he provided value, unexpected value, especially with his ability to block shots. Ended up playing 72 games in 17 minutes, 5 points, 3 rebounds, 0.6 threes, 0.4 steals, and 0.7 blocks on 49, 75, and 31% from three. But numerous big games from Mejri. A 4-block game against the Bucks. A 5-block game with 15 points, 8 rebounds, and 2 steals against the Raptors. A 13-5 with a steal and 5 blocks against the Celtics. These really random, out of the blue, nowhere or out of nowhere type performances from Kleber, especially with those block numbers. He was a guy whose European numbers coming from Germany looked pretty okay and looked like he could have some sort of an impact. He shot the ball well over the last half of the season, 51% from the field and 37% from three. Looked a little bit more comfortable there. And the block rate was really strong. But again, we're talking about this front court that's likely going to have some injection of new talent come in there, whether that's the draft and free agency or just the draft. And that could potentially limit what Maxie can do. And the 17 minutes he got per game this season, they were fine, but they're really not going to impact too many fantasy leagues, I don't believe, going forward. Probably the last guy that we really need to touch on is Dorian Finney-Smith, who had somewhat of a lost season as well. Just 21 games for Finney-Smith, 21 minutes per game, 6 points, 1 3, 3.6 rebounds, 1.2 assists, half a steal, 38, 73, and 30%. Played more minutes than what he played the season before, shot better, but that's not hard when you shoot 37% in your rookie year. He shot 38 this season, and the 3-point percentage under 30. True shooting of under 50 in both of his seasons. Doesn't do anything assist-wise, not a super strong rebounder. Plays okay defense, but doesn't rack up the defensive stats there. He just doesn't do anything from a fantasy point of view that should be getting us really anywhere close to being excited. We know that Carlisle loves him and they will find minutes for him for his defense, but even if he, much like Scooter Magruder in Miami, even if he plays 30 minutes per game, he would struggle to sniff a 20-team league, and I don't really see massive upside for Finney-Smith. He's 25 years of age already. I think they do guarantee his contract for next year. Just to having wing defenders is an important thing in the NBA, but he offers nothing for fantasy. He was outside the top 300 this year. He was outside the top 300 last year. He'll probably be outside the top 300 again next season. And ideally, if your team is good, he's not part of the rotation. I don't see huge room for growth for Finney-Smith. The other guys we haven't talked about, Aaron Harrison, he played minutes. He was shit. He shot 28% from the field, which is horrendous. If he can show the sort of growth that his brother did in Memphis, then maybe there's something, but probably not. While Jalen Jones, Kyle Collinsworth, they got their playing time. But John Motley's probably the more interesting guy out of these two-way players. He played only 11 games and 16 minutes, but averaged almost 9 points, 4.5 rebounds, and shot 53% from the field. He had a monster usage of 33%, which is astonishing, and he ended the season really, really strongly. 14-8, 26-12, and a 21-6 in 3 of the last 4 games. High scoring, but he just didn't bring very much to this team defensively, and that's something that if he's going to have to play at center, which he did, he needs to do that. 12th percentile for forwards in steal and block rate is just not going to cut it, but he is a strong rebounder. He can score, and he can do it with a decent chunk of efficiency, and he could find himself, if Mejri goes and Nerlens Noel goes, he could find himself converted from a two-way into a full-time contract next season and be that 12th or 13th man on the roster. But for him to ascend to stardom, I think we're grasping at straws. He's 23 years of age already. Probably, what I should have a look at Jonathan Motley's G League numbers for the Texas Legends. Let's bring that up quickly because he did play for them on that two-way deal. Let's have a look. So for Texas, he played 34 games in 33 minutes, averaged 22 and 10. Impressive. 57 from the field, 70% from the line, 2 assists, a steal, a block per game, strong offensive box score plus minus, strong advanced stats, PER of 23, efficient, good VORP, really, really strong numbers there. And I think from that, what we saw from him in the stretch down the end of the season, it should be enough for me to go, you know what, I can see him getting a larger opportunity next season. And maybe for you guys in 30-team leagues and some of the Red Rock 30-team Dynasty leagues, maybe he can become a contributing player to some degree. But I still think that we're a long way off that happening, and I don't think that he's destined for even rotational level minutes in the next couple of seasons. I think that probably does it for the Dallas Mavericks. No one else that really bears talking about. That pick is going to be super important. Someone to pair with Dennis Smith. Love for Bumba to go there. We'll see how that all works out. Don't forget, leave a 5-star rating for this podcast on Apple Podcasts and subscribe wherever you're listening. Google Play, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spotify, and on YouTube. Follow me on Twitter at redrock_Beeble and check out lockedonfantasybasketball.com where you can find all that information about the Red Rock Listener and Dynasty Leagues. We are done here, guys. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.